Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Laura Booth for aboutislam.net, and I pray this finds you well and blessed in every way. As you can see, I'm in a slightly different setting to videos you might have seen before, because as we are all working from home these days, we have to, share and share alike. So at the moment, I'm in my sister's house in North London, and my daughter's got a Zoom meeting. There's stuff going on in the kitchen. So I'm up here in my niece's bedroom. So enjoy the background, because we're really nosy about backgrounds. May Allah forgive us. We're always like, what's that picture of? Enjoy. Wherever you are in the world, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the multiple ways in which Muslims in the West are asked to integrate, and the huge amount of expectations on our young people as well, and of course on families. How do we bring up our young with multiple identities? And how do we successfully navigate all the push and pull factors in our daily lives? And before introducing my guest properly, I just want to really flag up an interesting story right now. Halima Aden, I'm sure you've all heard about this, has just said that her supermodel career, she sees it as a sham, because she was so quickly drawn into forgetting who she was and dressing in ways that she wasn't comfortable with, but really negotiating her faith in the workspace in an uncomfortable way. And she's come out and said, I'm going to do it my way. So we're going to be making some reference to that with my guest today, inshallah ta'ala, and giving you tips as well on how to bring up children with Muslim values in the modern age. So without further ado, I'm really happy now to introduce Brother Jihad Turk, and he is the president of Bayan. Bayan is an amazing organization educating the next generation of scholars and believers in America.
We say Bayan Islamic Graduate School, and that's exactly what we do. We educate the next generation of American Muslim religious leaders and scholars to better serve the American Muslim community, although we do have some students from abroad, not only from Canada, just north of us, but also from places like Tajikistan and India. And, we feel like Islam is like a beacon of light that can illuminate the whole world. And how we do it here in the United States, I think, can be of use to people who are navigating similar questions around the world. Not only in far-flung places, but also near-flung places like the UK.
You know what? It can't be easy. Having a name like Jihad, it's such a beautiful name, and our brothers and sisters out there will know what it means. But perhaps some non-Muslims watching will go, why on earth would your parents call you armed struggle? Would you like to explain that just before there's any confusion?
Yeah, sure. So I was born I'm an older person. I was born in 1971. So I'm coming up on the half century mark. So in the 70s, my father, who's an immigrant from Palestine, born in Jerusalem in 1938, at that time it was called Palestine. There was no other name for it at that time. It was before the occupation. And he immigrated to the United States as a 17-year-old and met my mother, who's Christian American, Caucasian, from Oklahoma. They met in California, they got married and moved to Arizona, where I was born and raised. So I consider myself an American kid from Arizona with the exotic name Jihad. And my father named the boys. We were two boys and three girls growing up. And so my mom named the girls. And so when I was 7 or 8 years old, I was playing football, or as we call it here, soccer. And my teammates started calling me Jay, just for short. And when the roster came out, they wrote my name Jay, Jay Turk. And I brought it home and showed it to my dad, and he looked disappointed, and then he crossed it out and wrote Jihad and made dittos for that's an old school way of making photocopies, and went to the next game, and on the sideline before the game passed out the corrected roster of players. And I was really embarrassed. I was like, Dad, what are you doing? At 7 or 8, you just want to fit in and you don't want to rock the boat. And so I was just kind of concerned. And my dad looked at me. He goes, no, son, I gave you that name because it has a great meaning. It means to struggle do the right thing. Sorry. And it might be odd or unfamiliar to people, hard for them to remember or pronounce, but it's worth that extra effort. And, that's been for me, it was a kind of a pivotal foundational moment in just my own identity. And I've always gone by Jihad ever since then. And when I was a teenager, it was just an exotic name. I mean, you were either black, white, or Mexican in Arizona back in the 70s, and so people just thought it was an exotic Mexican name. And those who are close to me knew that I was of Arabic or Palestinian background and Muslim, but most people in society just thought it was an exotic name and it didn't have any other connotation. That changed, of course, in 9/11. And I was in graduate school. I was doing my doctoral degree at UCLA at the time. And at that point, I was doing Islamic studies and also, shortly thereafter, served as the imam of a very large and the oldest mosque here in the Southern California area. And so I became a little bit of a walking teaching moment. But I have to say, and I'll pause after this, I have to say that, people oftentimes think it must be difficult having the name like Jihad in today's age under this current administration, et cetera. And the reality is that most people have, although they have a negative impression of Islam, it's very superficial here in the United States, at least, in the sense that they just have an imagination of what Islam is and who Muslims are. But when you're able to connect to people, heart to heart, face to face, there's generally an openness and even a curiosity. And so when the conversation comes up, it's usually not in a hostile context. It's people genuinely feeling like they can ask me and are open to hearing what it is that I have to say. And so,
You know what? I'm just going to pause there a second because I think I've got an unstable connection. Thank you for that, Brother Jihad. I'm just going to try to connect to my phone. No, I've got no gift gap either. Okay, Bismillah. We'll carry on. So I can see that really touched you. That even that ownership of the name, and of course, young adulthood is a crucial time related to personal well-being, connection with peers and family, and for a minority group, it can be layer upon layer of questions. I won't say difficulties because I hate this idea that having multiple identities is a difficulty. Now, with Bayan, you're involved in working with young people and with families. I wonder, first of all, let's try and break down some of the again, I don't want to say issues, some of the questions that young people are bringing forward that really need to be addressed and perhaps aren't being addressed very well in mosques right now.
yeah, so part of what we do is we train imams, we train Islamic school teachers and principals, we train chaplains to serve in hospitals and prison systems and universities as well as the military. So we're training the leaders, if you will, who are interfacing with young people. And so part of what we offer them by way of training isn't just Islamic studies, it's leadership skills. And an important part of leadership skills the leadership skills that we offer have to do with and spiritual formation of young people, as well as psychology. We bring a Muslim psychiatrist from Yale University, Dr. Hamada Hamid, to come and train imams how to be first responders in mental health within our community and amongst young people, how to recognize young people who might face depression, who might face abuse, who might face, identity crises, and know when to escalate to a mental health professional and when to and how to approach things that don't require a mental health professional from a way that deals with the psychology of young people in their formative years. So given that, the challenges that young people face oftentimes have to do with how to navigate the back home tradition and culture versus American identity. And that's really at the crux of what it is that we're attempting to do as an institution, is to help the community as a whole, but also young people in particular, navigate that pathway forward. And it's a very long and complicated process, but that's really at the heart of what it is that we're trying to do here at Bayan Islamic Graduate School.
Do you think the approach is working right now, where we speak all the time about, depression and everything's going wrong and you're under a great deal of stress? I mean, talking to children about stress can give them an outlet, but it can also trigger something that actually wasn't there. I'm thinking about, do we teach enough about how to be happy and what we have to offer as Muslims? That's something that I really recognize as being missing in our dialogues, amongst ourselves right now. Is this we are different, and difference can be good.
Yeah, so I think the important distinction to keep in mind in terms of how it is that we teach these things is that what we're doing in teaching the youth director or the imam in dealing with young people isn't to suggest that they talk about it in ways that overwhelms or that might trigger something, but rather to help them learn how to look for signs in a young person who might be experiencing something that requires a professional, and then when to escalate it. But as for what it is that they actually talk about, how it is that they instill a sense of pride in their connection to the Islamic faith, that is really the interesting part and the majority of the work that imams and Islamic school teachers and principals and youth directors are engaged in, and chaplains for that matter, who are working with Muslim communities, let's say, for example, on university campuses. So, or in prison systems. I mean, we have 1% of the US population is Muslim, and I think I've read recently that upwards of 10% of the prison population is Muslim. And it's not because Muslims are doing more crime, it's because, in fact, people who are incarcerated and there for a long period of time oftentimes embrace Islam in prison. And the majority of the Muslims who are in prison have embraced Islam in prison, overwhelming majority. So yeah, I was actually one of our graduates. One of our graduates is a chaplain in Oakland, California. His name is Sheikh Abdurrauf Nasser, African American gentleman in his 70s now. And he's been doing this work for decades. And he said he was recently meeting with 100 formerly incarcerated Muslims who had finished their 20 plus year stint in prison. And when you do 20 years in prison, it's because you did a serious crime. And he said, I was meeting with 100 of them because he wants to create a Muslim halfway house to help people integrate back into society when they're out of prison. So I pulled him aside. I said, Sheikh Abdurrauf, how many of those brothers were Muslim going in, having committed such serious crimes? And he, with skipping a beat, he said, at least 95 out of that 100 embraced Islam in prison. So yeah, so I mean, it's an important field for the kind of work that we're doing. And so what we're really teaching them is that your true potential as a human being is realized when you acknowledge the nature of reality, that you are created by the one who created all things. You are, with intent and will, God's will, you were created on purpose, and that you have a potential to realize the beauty of your creation and your design by the Almighty by submitting your will to Him and by manifesting gratitude to Him through service of other human beings and making this world a better place. That's really, in a nutshell, the message, the attitude, the posture that a believer has. And if you have that sense of purpose and meaning as a young person, it really is fulfilling, because young people are looking for purpose and meaning. That's really what it's about. Young people are, sort of trying to figure things out, and they see what's broken in the world, and sometimes they despair, sometimes they get lost, sometimes they're confused as to what things, what's the ultimate purpose. And because they despair, which I believe is the opposite of faith. It's not disbelief, but actually despair. It's giving up hope in the divine and in your potential and in everything else. And so I think that if we can just give young people a sense of hope and inspiration that they are important and significant and contribute to the betterment of this world through and ultimately achieve inner happiness and sense of security and peace, if they acknowledge the true nature of reality, i.e., God is the creator of all things and is benevolent and beautiful, and He loves beauty. And the way in which you can draw near unto God is through acts of service and devotion, worship to God, but also service of your fellow human being.
That's absolutely beautiful. I actually want those three sentences that you described as, having a purpose, being of service, and knowing that being certain that your Lord is there for you. Print it out. I think that should be a logo. That should be a slogan. That's something that we really need. I know that you've got 3 points you want to make today, and 3 areas. So I'm going to let you kick off now with 3 areas that I think are really vital, because there'll be parents watching this, and I've been through the teenage years, and really, brothers, sisters, you don't have anything to feel guilty about if you're struggling, okay? Every household is being touched by great amounts of fitna coming in now, a great amounts of confusion coming in now. And believe me, we've all been through it. So you have my heart, and you have the support of aboutislam.net, and we've got an expert here to, inshallah, give you a way through some of the minefields or some of the difficulties you might be facing. So, Brother Jihad, please, your 3 areas you want to discuss today.
Yeah, the first one is just creating the Muslim household. What is when young people get married, it's important that before having children, if you're trying to pass on the faith effectively, it's important that you model for young people how to be engaged in your faith. So creating the right sort of environment for your children when you have them from before they're even born is essential. Creating practices within your home, i.e. having great communication with your spouse, praying together as a family, and making prayer meaningful. And I'm going to get to that, and I'm going to emphasize that one in more detail once we're going to go through the different ages of the kids. So when the child is young, one of the things that my wife and I did is, given that I didn't share this with you yet in terms of my own trajectory of learning and growth, when I was in college, or uni, I think as you guys say over there, I withdrew after my first year of college, and I received a scholarship to study at the Islamic University Medina in Saudi Arabia. And I went there and I studied and I learned Arabic. For even though my father's Palestinian, I did not grow up speaking more than just a handful of words of Arabic. And so I went and started really from scratch, learning the language of the Quran. And having studied there for about a couple of years, I decided to return to the United States and finish my undergraduate in Islamic studies, shifting from engineering, which is what I started out in, to Islamic studies, and I did so. But the point that I'm making here is that having learned Arabic and had access, having access to the Quran and that direct connection to the Word of God, I found it so, in prayer, it made prayer so much more meaningful. And so when years later I ended up getting married, I spoke with my wife about the possibility of raising our children in a bilingual household. I could speak Arabic and she could speak English. And my wife's an educator and a teacher, and she's originally from Kashmir, by the way. So our kids are half Kashmiri, a quarter Palestinian, and a quarter, American or Caucasian. And so she researched it as a good educator would and said, yes, it's actually best practice. And one parent speaks one language, other parent speaks the other language. So from the time that our children, we have 4, alhamdulillah, that they were in utero, I spoke to them exclusively in Arabic. And our oldest one is now 20 years old, and we still only speak in Arabic. We have a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And they're bilingual. And I would always speak to them in Arabic, but Quranic Arabic, not a Palestinian dialect or any other dialect. I speak, Quranic Arabic, because the purpose is for them to be able to read and understand and access the Quran in a meaningful way. And I remember and I say that as one thing, if you have the luxury or the possibility of if you know Arabic, if you can pass that on and give your children that access to the Quran, that's phenomenal. And it's no extra effort on their behalf, because as children, they just pick up language as part of their growth. So if you can create that bilingual environment, that's phenomenal. And I remember when my oldest, who again was now 20, was only 4, and his younger brother was 2, I was reciting some verses of Quran to them, putting them to sleep at night, and I was reciting from Surah Al-Baqarah, the verse, "Ba'd a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem." لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي. So my son said, Baba, ما هو الغي وكيف يتبين من الرشد? He said, Baba, what is غي and how is it distinguished from rushd? And I didn't even know he was really paying attention. I was just reciting some verses from the Quran, but he was parsing it and trying to process it at the age of 4. And so, I knew I was that encouraged me to keep going with that effort. So my point is, model for your kids how to connect to the Quran, give them access to the Quran as one sort of foundational part of your household. And again, it might be a luxury. Not everyone can speak Quranic Arabic, but if you can just create an environment that's infused with that, that's number one. Number two, when it's like super important to create a communication with your children, creating, let's say, for example, meal times where all of the devices are turned off, no cell phones, no television, nothing, no electronics. There's now these devices you can just shut off your Wi-Fi and just silence everything. Create dialogue around the dinner table. And it's many parents are saying, oh, I've tried that. I asked their kids as they get older, what did you do today in school? What did you learn? And they always say, I don't know, nothing, sometimes they just grunt. And so parents kind of give up quickly, and then, there's not really a fruitful conversation around meal times. So I always say, create or model for them questions that are interesting and start telling stories, and then they'll want to jump in with stories. So one of the things that we oftentimes do around dinner time is we'll say, well, what was the best thing that happened to you today? What was the worst thing that happened to you today? And how did you deal with it? Right. And so we would then share as parents, and then the kids oftentimes would have stories of what happened at school or what a friend said or this or that. And then things start becoming lively. And then you have a beautiful conversation, and you also model for them how to deal with difficult challenges, et cetera. Now, the scary thing is here, sometimes, kids who go to public school, or they might be exposed to drugs or, all kinds of things. And it's important not to overreact if your kids share with you a real life situation that, you want to come down in a firm way and assert like this is the right way to do it. But if you come down too heavy handed, the children will pull back and they won't be open. So you have to sort of be very delicate about how it is that you respond, even though you have a clear moral sort of response or visceral reaction. It's important that you temper that so that you maintain the channels of communication with young children as they're growing older, because it's important to remember when they're before kindergarten, you're their whole world. But as they start going into elementary school, preschool, elementary school, their teachers then become a big part of their influence. And if you send them to an Islamic school, great. But if you send them to a non-Muslim school, it's important that you make sure that you choose wisely in where you send them. But as they get into the adolescent, middle age, tween age, and then teenage years, more and more of the pie of influence, where it used to be all parents and then split between parents and teachers, there was a small sliver of friends. The friends kind of eclipses in that pie chart of influence both parents and teachers. And by the time they're 15, 16 years old, it's 87% friends, and parents and teachers divvy up the remaining 13% of influence. And so I always say, so before they're completely gone with influence in their friends, take advantage of that time where you're the biggest influence by creating that dialogue, creating rituals around prayer, and making prayer meaningful. And here's what I mean by that. When it comes time for prayer, sometimes there's tension. Time for prayer, oh, I'm playing a video game, or I'm, chatting with my friends, or I'm going to do something else. Instead, if you could, instead of like getting angry or pressuring or using emotional, just be persistent but calm and steady in your response, and just insist that it's time for prayer. And then just eventually they will come around to accepting that it's time for prayer, and there's not really a way around it. So don't have a prelude to prayer being some kind of conflict or tension, because that undermines the whole spirit of the activity. And then during prayer, given that, again, in our household, our children are able to understand the Arabic, but in most households, prayer, Quranic Arabic is not the native language of the children. And so they might understand or learn the surahs that are being recited in prayer, but they're thinking in English or whatever their native language is. Um, they need to somehow make prayer, you need to, as a parent, make prayer meaningful for them. So one way is to, after the prayer, um, give them insight into how it is that you connect to God by having a supplication that you share together as a family. And you can model it as a mother or as a father in English, what it is that you're hoping for, what it is that you're in need of personally. And you can model for them and give them insight into your connection and relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a kind of the lost art of dua, because so oftentimes we simply memorize something that the Prophet said in Arabic, as opposed to taking his example of how he connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the principle of that, and then applying it in a meaningful way in our native language, in English, in a way that gives access to our children and the next generation of how it is that we connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And here's the other aspect that's super important, is when you're leading the prayer as maybe the father, or even if you're not leading the prayer, but you're one of the parents or the mother, and it comes time for the supplication, don't just have the father lead in supplication. Take turns where every member of the family, even the young children, participate in making a dua. And sometimes young people, 5, 6, 7, they're shy to do so. So one of the things that I recommend is to give them a little bit of a formula. Say something that you're grateful for. Say something that that you need help working on, and ask for something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you want in the world, where whether it be for good health and wellness for your family, or world peace, or whatever it is, right? And so just having that formula for first expressing gratitude, then asking for help for what it is that you're working on personally, and whether it's being more patient, or uh, listening to your parents, or whatever might come to their mind, and then ask for something from God Almighty. That kind of formula, or some other formula, it doesn't have to be that, gives young people the starting point for using the language, for figuring out the language for personally connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, instead of just memorizing a dua in Arabic that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said. It makes prayer so much more significant and fulfilling and beautiful. I'll pause there just in case you had some questions. I was talking a lot, so.
No, no, that was perfect. So from that, I take two really, really important tips. One is about conversation amongst the family and making that interesting. And as a storyteller, I kind of always bring an interesting story to the table. And then other people jump in. You're so right about that. Rather than my other side, of course, as a journalist, is to bombard. Who are you seeing? What are you doing? Where have you been? How was school? What grades are you getting? Yeah, that literally never works. So I really love that, and I appreciate that. And yeah, definitely, brothers and sisters, making the salah time something that the family does as much as possible. It won't be possible every salah, but at least have one in the day when the kids are at home. And I've seen this modeled by families where they may do some dhikr afterwards, or they talk about an essence or a name of Allah, or there are things you can do. I wondered as well, Brother Jihad, about the self-learning. We're talking a lot about parents modeling for children, and sometimes we get stuck in our own faith. Oh, I kind of know enough to muddle along. And then you're going to get hit at possibly 11 or 12, 13 at some point with, Mum, my best friend doesn't believe in God. You must have had this a few times.
They didn't sort of say it in that way. It was just kind of a given, because it's actually quite pervasive, not necessarily amongst Muslim friends, but in society at large. I mean, our children, they go to a private school. Where my wife teaches, it's a Waldorf school, or they did when they were young. My two younger daughters are there now, but my older sons went through that.
Sign a group, funnily enough.
What's that?
My kids used to go to the Steiner groups when we were little, when they
Oh
were little.
yeah, very good. So we were one of the only Muslim families there. So they were exposed to all, different approaches and viewpoints on life and God, or, atheism, etc., from a very young age. And the way we've always handled it, whether it was atheism or, just other faith traditions, uh, is to have a very confident posture to say, this is who we are. This is what we believe to be true. And, for our neighbors who are Christian or Jewish, we uh, um, congratulate them on the celebration of their holidays, and invite them to join us in helping us celebrate our holidays, right? And so we'll include them with opportunities to enjoy some of the beauty of the Eid, the two Eid festivals in Islam. So that's kind of been the posture. And in fact, one of the best ways, because I was, the second point you asked me with the 3 points. The second point is how to deal with teenagers once they start having the sphere of influence of friends eclipsing that of yourself as a parent, or of teachers or other mentors. Here's the trick. Here's the key, and it's not easy. It's to, especially if your children are not in an exclusive Muslim environment, but even if they are, it's to make your home party central. It's to make the hangout place for your children and his or her friends your home. Because let's say, for example, if they're non-Muslim, they come over to your home. First of all, they'll appreciate whatever food it is. I don't care, the teenagers love food. And if you have some particular ethnic background and, and great cooking with wonderful smells, and teenagers will love that. And so it'll be different for them, but it'll be a point of pride because your friends will love hanging out at your house because of the food. But then also when it comes time for, prayer, then they'll be able to see you pray. And you don't have to, as young people who, there's oftentimes a lot of ignorance about Islam and Muslims. And so young people who just want to fit in, sometimes will conceal some part of their identity that's not already sort of on the radar of their friends. And, they don't know how to talk about it. They don't know how to express it. So I remember my 12-year-old now, a few years ago, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, she had a friend stay over, sleep over. Her friend's not Muslim. And it came time for the evening prayer. And so her friend was there, and so we said, it was time for the evening prayer. Uh, here's what it's about. We explained it, and you're welcome to observe, to either participate or sit and watch. And she decided to sit and watch, and and it's okay to say participate as well, because for some people, just the act of participating in prayer is enough to move someone to embrace Islam. And I have many dozens of stories of people who've been affected in such a way and ended up embracing Islam. But, she was only 9 or 10 at the time. And she just sat and watched us from the couch. And then when it was finished, her reaction, which was very moving to my daughter, she said, "That was beautiful." I mean, that was her, just a genuine reaction. And I remember even my teenager, who's now 18. I think he was 14 or 15 at the time. I took him on a road trip, and just the two of us, a father-son trip. And he said, "Can I bring a friend along?" It was a couple of days we went to the mountains to go snow. I went skiing. He went snowboarding. Teenagers. So he brought a friend along, and his friend was of Jewish background. And it came time for prayer. And so, I explained to his friend. Now he's in high school, and this is probably the first time his friend had experienced him praying. And so I said, we're going to do this evening prayer. He said, "Can I join in?" So we said, "Sure." So we did the prayer, and we explained what's being said and how it's being said, and he participated. He stood next to us, and it was beautiful and sincere. And for my son, you can just see how it brought his two worlds together, and help young people oftentimes have this bifurcated identity, the schizophrenia, where they are Muslimi at home, and then go from Jihad to J, or Muhammad to Mo, or whatever outside of home. And the two worlds, they don't quite figure out how to reconcile. And so what happens is oftentimes if they don't figure out in high school how to reconcile that and figure out who they are, when they go off away from home and have freedom, they go to the extreme in oftentimes the non-Muslim identity and indulge in all kinds of vices. And so and then realize it's a hollow thing. And sometimes they come back, and sometimes they're too far gone. And so having that crucial high school period where they can reconcile their two identities, they can come together in a way that makes them feel whole, and they can navigate through the world with that whole identity. It makes them helps them make choices, good choices in high school, and then prepares them for when they have the freedom and they're off out of the house in college.
So I guess what's really important to say is that you may be watching this and you're in a time of turmoil, is that Allah Ta'ala can give you this opening at any time, so don't give up. I think, the message really for all of us is that a reminder that Islam is something so precious for humanity that when most people see it, they'll be drawn to it. So as you said earlier, Brother Jihad, that the people in the US or even in France or the UK who think they hate Islam know nothing about it. They have an imaginary, completely falsified picture of what it is. And frankly, if it was that, we'd all run in terror. So once they see something as simple as the prayer, it's like, oh, wow. I mean, my eldest daughter, when she was at school, she asked the teacher, could I have a prayer room? And they said yes. And two Christian girls came in with her that were friends of hers, and they watched and they said, you know what? I think we'd like to pray. Now they did their own prayer. But as Christians, they wouldn't have thought to ask unless the Muslim girl had done that. So we have something to give. And I think that real joy of bringing friends into the house, that's a really wonderful thing to try and do. And I just want to add one thing, that many of our convert brothers and sisters, we make our homes very sanitized when we come to Islam. I don't know if you've ever come across this, Brother Jihad, but we have, it's like you want to cleanse everything. It's a spiritual scrubbing of the doors and the windows and the floors, and nothing can come in except for prayer. And it can be a little bit tight. Sisters, if you're feeling like this, take a step back and remember that Allah Ta'ala has made us human beings with a smile, that he's made us have a heart to laugh, that he's made us, children to enjoy their lives. And it's okay to have fun in the house. In fact, that is the place to have fun. So I just wanted to add that, really.
Yeah, and that's why I called it Party Central. You really have to, you're competing with other attractive things to young people. They see how joyous a celebration Christmas is, for example, as we're coming on that season now, and they feel like, they don't have an alternative within the Muslim context. So that it's important to make Eid very festive so that, the young people look forward to it and they can understand, okay, now it's my friends' turns who are Christian to really enjoy this season, but we have our season coming up too, and it's something to look forward to, not just the Eid, but even the whole month of Ramadan. So having that out there, one other thing I would say is that when young people have a sense of purpose and knowing who they are, teenage years are filled with insecurity.
Mm.
And sometimes it's when you have that sense of self-knowledge or self-confidence, it's very intriguing to one's friends. And so I remember when I was leading the youth group as the imam at the Islamic Center of Southern California, we had a group of young people who lived not too far from the mosque in the downtown area of Los Angeles. And one day they came with a friend to the mosque, who was of Latino background, and he says, "I'm here to embrace Islam." So I said, "Well, what brings you to this point?" He said, "I grew up in a Catholic household, but my brother, who, we lived in a tough neighborhood, and I don't know if he was part of a gang or not. I don't know, but he said his brother was killed when he was like 5 years old or something like that. He was shot and killed probably by some gang activity, and he said, I was angry at God. I was mad at God, and my Catholicism. He probably wasn't very knowledgeable Catholic, so I'm not really blaming Catholicism. But he says that I didn't know how to process that. And so I turned my back on God. In fact, I became an atheist. And he said I was an atheist all of this time. And through my interaction with this group of friends who happened to be Muslim, um, it sparked something. It reignited something in my heart about God. And I had a dream the other night where, in my dream, I looked down and I was in bed and I looked down on my chest where my heart was, there was a big hole. And I realized that I had removed God from my heart. And he said, since that time, I reconnected to God. I believed in God again. And then from afresh, I was able to ask, well, what is the way to God? And because of the example of his friends, he looked at Islam very seriously and found that approach resonated with him. And he embraced Islam, and it was transformative for him. So, and brought him that inner peace and tranquility that he had been longing for. And so, young people oftentimes want to conform and fit in, but what they don't realize is that Islam is like this valuable jewel that we hide and conceal as a community. And instead of just trying to conceal that and go along with the flow, that if we just reveal that and polish it up and let it illuminate our lives and the environment in which we are, it will be appealing and attractive to others, and we can exert some kind of uplifting energy in the world through our example. And so, it's that kind of response that young people might expect when they have a confident connection to the faith.
Mashallah. And very briefly, we have your final point, please.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that when we as a community in within the household try and create and pass on the faith, create the right environment beforehand, with our children, create the right um, practices, communication at dinner, making prayer meaningful, and then making your house party central for your kids and their friends, so that they can bring together their two worlds. It's important then to also create peer groups of support through the youth group or through the mosque. And any good youth group, and we were talking about this before, Lauren, has to have a few good practices that are at the core of what any good youth group, and that includes having a positive peer group, having a focus on having a well-adjusted American Muslim identity or Western Muslim identity, and um, commitment to service of the community, but also the society in which we live. And lastly, the leadership skills, public speaking skills, which is what you teach so effectively. But really, that's an essential part. Public speaking skills, community organizing skills, leadership skills that help one have the confidence to be able to present an alternative to the direction that things might be going by default, that's informed by the values and virtues of Islam. And so that's an essential thing for us to create as a community. And I'll say one last thing. And you asked me the question earlier, what if as parents, we don't quite feel equipped to help our children navigate some of these questions? One of the things that we did at Bayan is to create a learning platform for busy professional Muslims who have other fields of inquiry other than just, or of other occupations other than Islamic studies and religious leadership. We created access to some of the best and brightest scholars of our time here in the West, and we call it Bayan Online, although we're probably going to switch it to Bayan On Demand shortly, which is a learning platform. It's like Netflix for Islamic studies. It has hundreds of hours of in courses on a variety of topics that really are foundational for any parent to have as they are raising young people. It gives them not only an understanding of the knowledge of Islam, but also it's approached from a mindset of critical thinking to meet the mindset of children growing up in the West, so that you're able to um, look with academic rigor at any subject in a way that will not shut down questions from your children, but really inspire them to ask more questions and find answers that are fulfilling. And so I encourage people to register. It's, if you were to take one course, with our faculty member, it would be $3,000. But what we've done is we've added dozens of courses on this site, and it's only $10 US dollars a month. You have access to the entire catalog or library of courses, and you can watch it. You can binge watch a course with Dr. Sherman Jackson or Dr. Omar Farouk Abdullah or Dr. Zarina Grewal or Dr. Asifa Quraishi or Dr. Jonathan Brown, and the list goes on and on. We have dozens of incredible faculty members. Dr. Omid Safi teaches a course on spirituality that are very relevant and meaningful and accessible, and it's at your own pace. So that's a little plug for Bayan Online, but really it was created. We're not for profit. We're there as an educational institution. This was created for the Ummah, to address the needs that we have as a community for our own religious literacy. If we're going to, so I encourage people in that regard.
I love that. And you know what? Dual learning is so important. So you can actually maybe choose a course with a younger member of your family and say, which one would you like to discuss? Let's do this together. And, once a week we'll have a discussion about what we've learnt. I thank you so much, Brother Jihad Turk. And I leave you with this, brothers and sisters, from the Holy Quran, as an advice about who we are and what we bring to the show. This is from Quran 29:70. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And as for those who strive in our paths, we will surely guide them in our ways. And indeed, Allah is with those who are of service to others. We'll see you again soon, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakumullah khair to my guest. May Allah ta'ala bless us all and keep us close to him. Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.